Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's been a minute. I've been away for a few months doing a little bit of traveling, so I wasn't doing quite as much streaming as I was necessarily either expecting or possibly planning. I wasn't really sure what the streaming situation would be, but yeah, didn't quite have the time to make for streaming. So I decided to cut my losses and just live in the moment, I guess. But now that I'm back home and back with my setup and things like that, I've been thinking about getting back into it and just continuing where I left off. So that's where we are now, I guess. Just a quick look at my Git history or the Git status here and even the current state of the Tmux session, which I actually haven't shut down since because it's running remotely. Looks like the last thing that I was working on was object decomposition, and it looks that for the most part the feature is implemented and there were just tests to run, I think. And I would be guessing that most of the tests, well, there are some, I would say, so there are two, I guess, success tests, but there are also, I guess, a number of error tests as well, and that was probably where I had left off. I probably should have just checked the end of the last stream, but I think I can infer from the information presented here. So there's already one of these tests which I had delayed nailing from the looks of it. So we have this X test, can't use the spread operator in object destructuring, and checking the case where we try to destructure something where it's not using a property shorthand. So this actually, if I understand correctly, isn't necessarily testing the destructuring itself, but the evaluation. In fact, this is potentially adding a test case for an error scenario that already existed but just didn't have tests present for it. So far it looks like we've one error test, can't use the spread operator when destructuring, or at least in object destructuring. Now, if I understand, or if I recall correctly, spread operator, yes. So I think this was the issue, was that syntactically you can use the spread operator in this context and this will, I believe, parse correctly. But it's actually not permitted here. Instead, we would be using the unspread operator, or I think in the newest iteration of the code base, I was potentially calling it the gather operator, because unspread, while it has the neat, I would say, opposite connotation of the spread operator and has a nice relationship in that way, I think gather or collect, one of these terms, makes a little more sense, or is at least more intuitive in my opinion. So with that said, let's take a look at what other errors are being introduced in the different contexts. So let's see, we have the evaluation of the bind here. So when we're doing a bind to an object literal, which is essentially our destructuring operation, we will call bind object. That will go through all the bits and make sure that they're all, so here's the first error that we were checking here, spread on object destructure. So we might rename the error to the error variant that we're using there. We also have this potentially new error variant, object property shorthand is not a variable. Now that might be the second one that we're already handling, is it? Assign object assign property shorthand not var. And so yeah, that's the, so that is a new case, a new error. And then we have, this is just a simple wrapping error that will generally get unwrapped and skipped in the error rendering phase. Evaluate the object index failed, so that's similar, it's just an error wrapping variant and similar for that. So we might not actually need to add any other new tests from the looks of it. It might actually just be a matter of adding some new code to the features file and also the, what was it, the documentation. But let me just double check here. So we have the bind object pair, we have property not found, so that could be a new error case that we want to check out. So actually, yeah, that would be, so if we have down here, we're doing an object destructuring and there's A and B on the right hand side, but then we're asking for C on the left, for example, then in that case, that's going to be an issue. Now, just looking at this, yeah, so this is again, well, no, not again, actually. So one of the thoughts I had when developing this language, to contrast it with one of its, even though I wouldn't be a huge fan of a number of the fundamental concepts, it does borrow a lot from JavaScript, but one of the big divergence is this consistency around showing that the keys are string literals, and if you don't have the quotes here, it will be accessing it as a variable, and the variable would need to evaluate to be a string, or it would be an expression and it can evaluate to be a string. But here on the left, I'm using a shorthand syntax, which is being referenced here, and that's fine, but do I actually support? No, actually on the left hand side it doesn't make sense to require the full string literals, because this syntax is for assigning to variables, so they have to be variables on the left, and it doesn't make sense for them to be stringified, so to speak. So in that case, that looks fine. Good job, passed me. You passed the test. And so next I will want to add that one new error condition, and then I can start adding to the features file. So let's see how we get on there. And I'll also want to rename that test as well. So what are we going to call this? Is it spread on object destructure? And that should cause the test to reevaluate on the right, yeah. And that is in features, so that's just remind me to do the to-do item. And then we'll have the prop test. So let's go ahead here and we'll say A, B, C, where A is 1 and B is 2. And what's what's the name of the error? Prop not found. Object destructure. Prop not found. Taking a while to run the tests here. I remember it had been getting progressively slower the more features we were adding, but should be taking that long. So we haven't rendered this error properly, so that's bind failure, so it might be worth adding a test for that just to make sure that that rendering is handled properly. So here we have just the case that A isn't defined yet. And the fix for that down here is to use the construction operator or the declaration operator in conjunction with the destructuring. But do I need a new test here? Is not defined. Yeah, just to make sure that the errors are, because I can fix this error easily enough, but I want to make sure that it doesn't resurface. So let's see. Object destructuring. This is prop not. So this would be var undefined. What's the earlier one called? Yeah, undefined. And this will be at position 2 of line 1, and it'll be not defined, is not defined. And so we'll want to update the rendering of that. And that happens in, where does it happen these days? It used to be in main, I believe. Is it still? Yes. Oh well. Not the best place for it, but it just reminds me as well that I need to add, do I need a new error for this? As long as I add all the unwrapping cases, then it should be fine. I shouldn't, because otherwise I'd need to add tests for all of these cases as well to make sure that they were properly unwrapped. I think it's fine without a test for that, so I'm going to remove that after. So let's see, we have, so these are the two new, if we call them leaf or root errors. The context ones are the new wrapping errors that we need to handle. So I'll put them up with the other bind errors. So bind, oh yeah, and so they have this failed suffix as well to identify these kind of errors too. So as unwrapping errors, or as errors that essentially track the code flow through the evaluation. And so those are the ones that we need to add extra unwrapping logic for in the rendering. And so we have bind next failed as well. So with those, I don't think there's really a need for that new error test as well. Still be interesting to see, does it fix the case in this run? I wonder what I could do to speed up these tests. I know that at certain points before I was just manually commenting out chunks of the code base. It might be the time to actually add some conditional logic. Now the issue, so conditional logic in terms of build or compile pragmas or something like that, so that during development mode chunks of the functionality are just omitted. Now that is also going to be tricky because that's going to then cause lots of tests to fail. Whether I add some extra logic as well, so that when I'm working on a specific part of the code base, it'll disable the rest of the code, or large chunks of the rest of the code base, and then only run a certain number of tests in that case. It'll be tricky to do that because there are lots of groups to maintain there. But it might be something that I need to do at some point, just because those compile times are quite severe. So object doesn't contain property not defined, so that's actually referring to the destructuring error is happening before the not defined error, it looks like in this case, because before I did have the equivalent of not defined over here, and so it was skipping this error. So yeah, it might be worth just running that again, just to, and hopefully that won't re-trigger a full compile as well, because I haven't changed the actual code base. And is that the only test that failed? So there's the prop not found one failed as well. So what was the issue there? Object doesn't contain property C, and that's what I would expect. So and it would be a different position. So here we go, let's try that. So that should solve the second error, and the first error should now be or at least the first chunk of source code should trigger the expected error at this point, because we're now satisfying the conditions that were causing the first error to be triggered. Will be interesting to see exactly what's happening at that point where the output is pausing. Not defined is not defined. Yeah, that's what we expect, and that's just the name of the test, or the name of the resulting file is not the one we expected. So that's all working as intended. So in that case, the next part to do is the features. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off on, well no, I'll just go ahead and save that, and that'll rerun the tests. And I can go ahead and open the features file, and we have to do down here at the bottom. I don't think I have any destructuring code yet, so what we'll do here is do I have any convention for what I call the objects in some of these tests? So we have, so I use X's for lists generally. And I've got X's for an object here as well. So we'll go ahead and use X's. A, B, C is equal to X's. Those will all be newly declared. Would it be worth just having a test to demonstrate I'm using spaces in some of these tests as well around when the objects or lists just have one item. I don't like that inconsistency. Maybe, I'll go ahead and, I don't think that makes much of a difference to the clarity realistically. And so I might add this new test just to show that even if you have one of the items declared but you don't have the other one, that's going to cause an error. And essentially there's no combination of, you can't use this or this to create to use destructuring of two variables with mixed declaration states. So you either have to have all the variables already defined or none of them. It's just in one way of thinking, it could be said that's a little overly strict in a way, but the reality is that it, to me, is actually a big source of a fairly insidious gotcha in the likes of Golang, where they do allow you to mix the declarations or mix having previously declared and previously undeclared variables in the same block. And what will happen is it will shadow the previously declared one, but that's not always so obvious. So actually preventing or restricting the mixing of those two is a little strict, but hopefully avoids that gotcha as well. So let's see, this should be enough to this should be enough to demonstrate that condition as well. So we'll call this can mix var declarations 1, and the second one will be, funnily enough, 2. I'll just rerun the test and get the actual error message that the compiler comes out with. So here we're going to have, let's see, I guess just print A, B, and C. And that should be 1, 2, 3. Will I add all of them? I'll demonstrate how to do it with just 2. And that should be let's try that. And we also have the docs as well. So I can be writing up the docs while that compiles. So we have functions. this up on a slightly wider screen. We have values, operations, variables. I guess it'll go in the variables section. Object properties, we've got controlled flow and functions. So I guess it'll go under variables because it's somewhat related to variable declaration essentially. It's, yeah, essentially a variable declaration shorthand. So a shorthand can be used for should we say declaring and assigning variables the values of object properties. I don't think we need to make it more complicated than that. Okay, and how are we with errors? So we've got a few errors now in our tests. Let's see, cannot mix declarations. So we were expecting errors there because I didn't update the error messages. Oh, that'll be that. And then for object destruct, that didn't get an error. Object property shorthand, not a variable. Only objects can be spread in objects. Got int. That just seems to be the, oh yeah, because I updated the positions. What happens in, and hey, welcome to the stream today. And what happens in this call add 1 plus 2? So this is to do with function variables. So essentially this is just demonstrating how, well, I guess first a little introduction to how tests are being declared here. This is somewhat of a custom setup because I'm testing a compiler, but essentially we have what is a stand-in for a source file in the first block, and then the second block is what we would expect the standard output of running that script to be. And in this case, this is essentially, so we're demonstrating assigning anonymous functions to variables, and this is essentially an alternative to declaring the same kind of function using a more traditional syntax. And so when we call print add down here, it's essentially calling the anonymous function here and just adding the two variables. I don't see the, so it's in your message it's saying 1.2 and 3. I'm not sure if that's intentional, but I'm guessing this is the part that you're referring to. Hope that helps. And so, yes, I also need to update the areas where I removed some characters. So here we're going to update this to 2, and same here, this as well, and finally this one should be updated too, and I'll save those in a separate commit. In fact, I can go ahead and start adding those now. Runtime errors. And that's just updating tests, so I don't really need to bump the version, I think. So that is update formatting in tests. And so now we have the actual errors, because before we had just the parse issues. So here, yeah, this is as we expect. So in the second one, it says A is already defined in the current scope at 1.1. I hadn't realized that I had that level of detail in the error messages. I mean, it's not a very advanced amount of detail, but something that I didn't have in the previous iteration of this compiler or interpreter. So that's kind of a neat thing to me. Then we have line 2.5, B is not defined. So there's a demonstration of just the fact that we can't mix declarations and initializations in the same object destruction call. Thanks for the question. So it's a dynamically typed language. So there are types insofar as each value has a type and a strong type. So when you assign a value to a variable, that variable has a type, but that is only enforced when you call operators. So operators are essentially strongly typed on the parameters to those operators or the operands. And so if you call an operator with the wrong types of values, then it'll throw an error. But other than that, the language is dynamically typed. So you can, if you have a variable of a certain type, you can just chuck another value of a different type into there. It is something that I'm debating about later, whether to introduce a Python style of, shall we say, type tags almost, so that you can, in general, functions will allow any type of value, but you can restrict them if you want in your scripts. But in general, the use case for this language is intended to effectively be an alternative to bash scripting. So having types is one of those things that, in that context anyway, I feel wouldn't provide as much benefit. So I've been, even though I'm a big fan of types for the use case, I am kind of, not enforcing that for the moment. You could reassign add to be equal to 4. So if I add a new test down here, and I just call this X for the sake of it, I could go, or sorry, if I just extended this guy, I could go, exactly, add is equal to 4, and then I go print add, and my output then should be 4. Now, we won't see the output of this. All the test will do is confirm that this is the output, but essentially, yes, this would be a valid sequence, because even though the variable is a function at that point in time, when you set a new value to it, the type of the variable changes. So it's dependent on the value rather than the variable. So maybe my explanation confused things a little. So it's looking like all the tests are running as expected. I've got my new little bit of documentation, and the one last thing to clean up is that we've got an overly long line in the bind file. Something's a big mess. Are you talking about the fact that you can replace the types are dynamic, is it? So let's see. So this line is too long, so I'll just go ahead and split that up. save that new version as well while it's recompiling. No one likes this stuff anymore. Oh, that's a pity. I would, yeah, I guess that's one way of looking at it. Now, I would argue that it comes down to, the idea of right tools for the job. So in the this wouldn't be the type of so this wouldn't be what you would consider, in my opinion, a general purpose programming language. So it's not like your Rusts or your Go's or your C's or your Javas, where you have a single language and it's going to be running on web servers, or it's going to be running Go is also intended to be run as scripts sometimes and things like that. So they have to, I think in those kind of cases, it's very beneficial to err on the side of having very strong types and things like that. But in the case of this language, that's not the target. So, it could be argued either way. My personal opinion is that types, for the most part, would be a bit more of a cumbersome thing in the areas where this language is intended to be used. And because of that, I think one of the reasons for that is, I would say, the return on investment of actually going to the effort of imposing those types from the number of times that those scripts are going to be run or things like that. I feel like it just doesn't add up, so to speak. So yeah, that's the reason for not having types here anyway. Apologies if you don't approve. So we're at this point, I think the Clippy checks are running, so we're probably in a good position to start adding the different chunks to be committed. And the comments are all rendered correctly. Yeah, styling looks okay to me. We have our error messages. Yeah, and those are the... Okay, so I have 3 new wrapping errors. Do I have a 4th one? Oh no, those are the 3 that I handled in the rendering. I wasn't sure if they were adding up. We have object destructuring. Our new error cases. These are the new success cases. And yeah, that, few Clippy errors, so I'll need to hold back on committing that just yet. So let's see, bind 275. How many errors are after coming up? Well, there's a few. So let's start at 245 actually. This should be a straightforward enough one. Yeah, so that doesn't need an explicit iterator. That error is being output twice. Expression can drop the borrow. Same with that. Probably a similar situation down here. And finally 295, that too. And yeah, that function has too many arguments. Is that something that I'm going to be brazen and just add a skip for? don't have any other Clippy allows. Okay, I do at the top here. How could I simplify this? Logically. So we're taking the context and the scope, the names and the binding. I guess I could combine the right hand side. So I've got one too many arguments. I mean, it seems a little silly to introduce something like this just to satisfy the or just to satisfy Clippy, but that's just what I think I'm going to do. So let's try this. Or I can do .1 and .0, right? I'm not a huge fan of this because it's not something I don't really use tuples using the accessor in that way in this code base. Oops, I still put in a Clippy directive there. I feel like I'm using Clippy relaxation pragmas more often than I'm using tuple accessors. In which case, I feel like just adding another Clippy directive. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see first if it actually resolves the issue. Yeah, I'll do a quick search in the code base for, let's see, how do I guess, backslash dot, so that it's not using the regex, and 0. So it's used in scope, and bind then is the only, oh, and the scanner as well uses indexing like that. And then if I do a search for Clippy, I have a good few. Well, some of these are old files, but... And yeah, most of these are just the imports as well. Yeah, it's kind of a balance. I guess either approach is fine and is somewhat consistent within the context of the project. I'll go ahead and see if I add these updates as well in preparation for doing a commit. And in fact, I'll just go ahead and commit it, and then I'll amend it if there's any issues with Clippy. So how do I phrase this stuff in this project as well? So add property assignment shorthand for objects, and so this will be add object destructuring syntax. Add support for object destructuring. Okay, that is compiled and cleared, so Clippy is fine and happy. Yeah, how long did this all take in the end? Nearly 3 minutes to compile, run tests, and do all the Clippy stuff. Yeah, felt like longer. I wonder if I watched the stream back, would that actually be different? Anyway, we'll go ahead and push that. Nice to be working on the main branch as well. I remember in the last iteration of this project, so much of what I was doing was in the development branch because I wasn't doing tests or anything like that. So it's nice to actually be working on tests on the mainline branch. Cool. So that if I jump into the Scratch file, let's see where we are. We've now done object destructuring, and next we will want list unspread. We want list destructuring and list unspreading. Now I think we also want that with objects. Oh, that's what I've said here. Object. I feel like will I change the indentation there? So next I think we'll do list destructuring. So here we've got bind object, where is that called? And we'll add support for the same with when we're assigning to a list. So when we take a list literal, what do we do? So we've got that's the AST object at the moment, is it? List. And we have items, I guess. Oh, thanks for joining, and hope you check that out again. So we have object destructure on non-object, and so we're going to add in. Oh, did I mess up the? Why is it doing that? Oh, I'm on the wrong line. There we go. And so we'll do list destructure on non-list. Oh, but that's the wrong error message. Yeah, so here we go. we'll do bind list. Oh no, oh, I didn't want to, okay, that's, whoops. Okay, I already pushed, we'll do, we'll add a lease onto it. I mean, I'm the only one working on it, so the lease is somewhat redundant, but I guess good to try and keep good practices at least. So context scope, names in binding, yeah, I think basically all of those are what we'll want in this case. The only difference is the left hand side, I guess, will be different. So instead of prop items, we'll have list items, and on the right hand side we'll have a list, but that should be it. And I guess here it could be worth checking out the old version of, okay, so I have a partial implementation of the object gathering, it looks like. Where is the old version of the, okay, yeah, so we have an old version of the code base with bind object. Do I have bind list? I do. And so here's the some of the code that I want to copy over. So if the left hand side, and actually that could be worth having in bind object as well. So regardless of verifying the length of regardless of requiring that the right hand side and left hand side of a list have equal numbers of items, in both kinds of destructuring, doesn't make sense to have 0 elements on the right hand side. As always, let's see what Python does. So if I go, does Python have object destructuring? Can you do this kind of, it's been a while since I used Python now, so yeah, I guess Python has maybe a similar approach to the one I'm using. So in that case, and does it have destructuring? No. No, it doesn't. So we can't really check it there, but what we could do here is go into the Chrome DevTools and say okay, so JavaScript allows it and just fails silently. Well, not fails silently, but it doesn't enforce anything there, so maybe I'll do the same. Doesn't make sense, it's essentially a no-op. Why am I checking for 0 there, as opposed to if the left hand side length is equal to 0, and then if the left hand side length isn't equal to the right hand side length? I'm not quite sure. Whoops, I'm going to run out of battery soon. I better grab a charger quite quickly. And we're back. And I knocked over a bunch of little figurines on the table as well in my gusto. There we go. So let's see. Still not sure about this. Okay, let's see. Bind list. And it's saying if the okay, so it's essentially doing kind of, is it kind of optimizing the case where there's nothing on the left hand side so that you don't like evaluate everything on the right hand side? I mean, that is something that, for better or worse, is a result of doing this kind of no-op assignment, is that the stuff on the right should be forced to evaluate. It might have side effects, which probably wouldn't be best practice, but it's still what you would expect, I think. So maybe it's better to just leave it like this, and we have a bind unspread list. I mean, I'm going to inline this into the bind list for the moment. I like instead of calculating whether this needs to be plural or not, I just put it in braces or in parentheses. So let's see if the length is on the left hand side. Okay, so this is in the case of, so once I add support for unspreading, then the number of items on the right hand side can be greater than the number on the left. So what are we doing here? We're doing a zip of the left hand side and the right hand side. And for each item, we're going to do a bind. I guess that's a bind next, I believe, is what I called, what used to be called bind prime or bind underscore is now called bind next. So we've context scopes already declared, which is now names in binding, left hand side, right hand side, and the bind type. Yeah, so that looks like that should be bind next. That will need to be replaced with context. And what else now? For each expression, yeah, it does a bind of that. And the context there is, do we do a new location? No, it's not, because it's just wrapping the error. And so it would be bind list item failed. And yeah, the object version has a shorthand for either pairs or individual items, I think. I didn't add tests for the individual items, did I? And did I put them both in the same commit as well, I think. So go back to Scratch. Let's see. So we've single var pair var. So I've the test done for that. But I need to do tests for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stash the current work, the current bit that I'm working on, and continue adding tests for the last feature, I think. And will I add them, will I amend them into the last commit? Not sure. Anyway, for the moment, just curious to see will this compile with the changes that are there so far. Yeah, so we have items 361. That's not found, so we need to pull that in. 371 already declared is now called names in binding. That's a new error, so that hasn't been declared yet. And expect an error but got a string, so that would need to be one of these kind of new location errors. Maybe I'll add that in now. So what's the location here? Location is the left hand side, but I'm not passing that in at the moment. So I'll need LHS location. Do I use that style anywhere else? Or do I do something similar? Do I want to do the error check beforehand? I don't think so. So I'll do it like this. IHS. And we'll have bind list and borrow this code. New location error. Oops. And that will be error. List destruct item mismatch, we'll say. And I'll need to pass in the lengths of the two sides. And yeah, I think think that's enough. Before I go ahead and try and continue with the tests for pair assignments in the object destructuring. So let's go ahead and just add source, or how do I do stash but keep some of the stuff? Yeah, I think it's just git stash, keep index. No, that's not it. Slash pop, git add. I think that's the only thing that I want to keep around. Everything else I want to remove from the working tree. Restore. Okay, and so yeah, all that's fine. And so I'm going to bind again. Bind object pair. So that's the one that I didn't do, or at least didn't do tests for. Where did I add the stuff? Cargo term enabled. Oh, it was, say, just a timing issue there for the color on the right hand pane. So let's see. Yeah, I was wanting to check what file I was editing for the test. So there was the variables file. And we use bind object pair both times, both when it's a pair and when it's a single. And I guess when it's a single, we reuse the name. So let's see. So if I rename A to B, then I print B, then I get 1 as the output, in theory. So I think the name on the left gets turned into the name on the right, but we'll see what the interpreter has to think about that. Does it agree with me? And I think we can add some more error tests for those cases as well. So we have object destructure prop not found. We'll also have object destructure rename collision. We'll say whoops. Yeah, like what happens there. So let's so we'll have that as well, where we've previously declared one of the variables that we would be using, but then we use the rename to avoid the redeclaration, and just to prove that it basically works as expected. So object destructure rename failed. What was the issue there? Where is it? Oh, it just says A not defined. Good thing I started adding in tests for this. So we have a pair with a name and the new value that's being given to the new name. Sorry, so the pair is what on the left side, I guess. Yeah, these are all the items on the left side, and so we have a pair. So it's got the name A and a value B. Now the B could also be destructured, which is worth exploring as well. Yeah, that, I mean, doesn't look great to me, but at least technically should be valid. So we have the prop name location on the right hand side. We evaluate the right hand side prop name. Okay, I think I need to step through this one piece at a time. So, and I'll go with the basic case. Maybe I should have put this in a separate commit, although it means that the last commit would be broken. Because the implementation potentially isn't doing what I was expecting it to do. We'll see. So we have the left hand side, we have a name and we have a new value, and the value is the new left hand side that we may be destructuring into as well. The right hand side prop name is equal to the name that we have here. So we're going to take a look at the object on the right hand side and do a lookup. So first of all, we're going to take the name here on the left and evaluate it to a string. So here, if we do want to do a rename, the left-hand side has to be a string. And that kind of makes things a bit clearer as well, I think. And so we can also do our renaming like that. So actually maybe it wasn't broken, I just didn't understand how to use my own programming language. So we have this kind of a destructuring, and we're then using the same setup to avoid clobbering an existing value. And I'll print A and B here. And then can we do nested destructuring? No, because the left hand side here will have to be will have to evaluate to a string, so there's no opportunity for shenanigans, which is a relief to me, to say the least. And so that should, I would say, sufficiently describe that. And then we have this case, object destructure, rename collision. I don't think that really, this would just be a silly case, but not something that's... Okay, so actually I'll add a test for the actual already in scope. So this one I'll actually move to the success tests because it should be valid. Not because it's good practice, but just to prove that it can be done. Then we will add an issue here. Just because it's a slightly interesting case. And so what position is that? That's position 7. And will I just lump them into the... What's going on there? 2 my sections defined for the test. What? Oh, that's my own. That's my own code giving out to me. Okay, where's the issue here? Oh, okay, yeah, there's 3 sections of that test, so we don't want the exit code part there. Oops. So I've got... So we'll just double check that the tests pass and that Clippy's alright. That'll take a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I can probably unstash my changes and continue on. You joining? So we have, let's see, our git stash pop. Yeah, that's grand. Yeah, I still have my cargo coloring, and I'll go ahead and bump the version here as well in anticipation of the list destructuring. And let's go back to where we were. So we had added, more or less added support for the list destructuring. We need to add the one new error, another failure error, but that's more or less the feature added, I believe. Message from here, so then we can get rid of that, and we've bind list item failed. Okay, and that can be taken away, compiling away in the background. So we'll want, I think, more tests in the variables file. So we had object destructure, and so we'll essentially do similar for list destructure. List destruct one, and this is always going to involve a rename, or an explicit rename anyway, because the keys on the right are, what are essentially keys on the right are actually integer indexes, and the variable names on the left will be instead positional. So let's see, we have 1, 2, 3 here. I'll have ABC. We'll also need some error tests. So it's runtime errors. This is going to be the mismatch one. I'll just call it answer it, or I'll just see what the error message says first. And what other errors did or do I have? Oh yeah, and list destructure on a non-list. Oh, I didn't add an error for object destructuring on non-objects, so I'll just add that as a new commit. Oh, the tests all passed, or at least the tests that were there. I also need to add in the new failure handling, so that's bind object. Pair fail, bind list, item failed. That should be enough there. And I want to save my test so that set up positional arguments in format string, but one argument, and the one argument isn't even correct. So let's see. Oh, lots of errors now. They're not just clippy ones this time though. Just in under the line max. I've already defined it. 357. Oh no, that's just the number of parameters is wrong. So I've got context scopes, names in binding. Oh, I think I just have the LHS location, right? Is the only problem there. Yeah, I think I just pass location like that, probably. And comfy. List destructure item mismatch. So I don't have I have some typo. Oh yeah. expect a structure. So that needs to be, so it's taking a val ref with source. What is the list? The list is of val ref with sources, I thought. Yeah, so it's a list and it just, I'm doing an into iter. Oh, it should be like that. I'm not taking a reference there though. Or maybe that's the problem. But I'm doing into iter. So I should be, yeah, the addressing isn't helpful there. Let me take a look at the old bind underscore. And the old bind list. Oh, I'm essentially cloning. Oh no. Yeah, that's something different. So where are we now? We're doing mutable right hand side list. Do I need to make it mutable as well? No, not there. Let's try that. See if it resolves it, and then I can figure out the types after. Maybe I could do it here. That would be an interesting method instead. To vet. Make my list into a veteran here. These compile times are something else. Cannot borrow that as mutable. Yeah, can I just do that? Seems to have the 2vec anyway, seems to have resolved part of my issue anyway. Did I disturb you? Okay, are there any other tests we can add while we're waiting here? So we've got our list destructuring. That's kind of as much as you need to do with the successful tests. Then the failure tests, we've got the argument mismatch. We also want the basic copy of that. List destructure on non-list. And actually the object destructure on non-object should be put something in there just to be clear. Okay, and so we're running tests now. So object destructure on non-object. And the issue is on location 1.1 only. Objects can be destructured into objects got int. And then this one will be the same. So only this can be destructured into lists got int as well. And then what was the error message we got here? This would be cannot bind 3 items to 2 items. And in fact I'll change that so it's so we'll phrase it like that. And that's more or less it for the list destructuring, I think, in terms of errors anyway, because they're just a bit simpler. Again, we don't have this shorthand notation for different cases, and we don't have the special renaming syntax because it is renaming by just default. So I guess I'll move on to features. Oh, and I never added the update to object destructuring. similar for, so what was the failure there? Object destructure rename was problematic. Why? Did I save it in maybe an in-between state? We'll see. Let's see what the issue is. Oh no, those should be swapped. And the error with the error message is can't buy. What's the have I a typo somewhere? I'm not seeing the issue there. I'm guessing it's a typo, but it's not so obvious to me right now. Alright, we'll do a quick rebuild and see how we're looking. You had them? Your head will lock it. Oh, this is painful. Okay, so it's the last error anyway, at least. So that's... Can I just... How do I... Whoops, what's going on there? Here we go. And if I do that... Oh, there we go. And names. Okay, so now we have enough bits that we need to add to the last commit, so that's going into the, well, it's going in a new commit but associated with the last commit. And we're adding some error tests as well, or just tests. No, they're not getting added. Okay. More details on object destructuring. Okay. And yes, so we just need the documentation for lists as well. Range indexing, object shorthand. And we won't have this second section for lists because they're simpler. Yeah, I guess shortly I'll add in the underscore syntax, which can be used to ignore variables, so it can appear multiple times in a bind and it won't get assigned. I wonder if that's in my Scratch file at the moment as well. Oh. Okay, that's probably enough. So, git dad. So let's see. Lists. Binding. That seems okay. I'd say Clippy will have a few choice words for me once that runs. List destructuring, yeah. Oh, and I need to copy that to the features file, or the features documentation. Even though the English is kind of funky for this, for declaring and assigning to variables the values of lists, I think it's slightly more correct, or at least the intent is clearer compared to declaring and assigning the values of lists to variables, because you're not declaring the values of lists to variables. I don't know. I think it's fine. So let's see. Too many lines. Yeah, I can get that. I can get behind that, but I don't think I'm gonna fix it. Right, next. It's not really that many lines, is it? Yeah. We'll use the same here. It's one of the core functions. Oh no, I've lost my Clippy suggestions. I don't want Clippy to run until I've finished these again. So 383. Use clone instead. And 384 instead of into iter, we just use iter. Okay, we're almost there. Oh, you happen. Change this to list item. 363. So let's see. And support for list destructuring. And I'm gonna go ahead and commit that. Go to scratch. And that's that done. So that is destructuring completed. Now range indexing also needs destructuring, I think, actually, so that can't be considered finished just yet. And let's rerun this again just before we push. And I think that'll bring us nicely up to the end of the stream as well, which isn't bad progress. So we finished off object destructuring, which actually involved, well, the implementation was basically there, but had a lot of subtle extra tests and features included that I wasn't expecting, so it was nice to get all those done. And got the list destructuring implemented as well, which was a lot more straightforward because it didn't have all the extra subtleties around renaming variables that object destructuring did. So yeah, pretty good progress today. What do you think? Yeah, you think so too? Nice. So once this Clippy gives us the sign off, I think we're good to push and then finish out the stream. And we'll have to see how long the compile has been running for as well, like what the timer says the runtime of that command has been, or even just the build command. And yeah, any suggestions on how to speed any of this stuff up as well would be more than appreciated. In fact, I would suspect that a certain amount of it would have to do with ladder pop. So if I look at the docs, I wonder, is there anything in terms of just speeding the whole thing up? Conditional compilation. I'm not sure what that means. Public non-terminal declarations. sure. Anyway, Clippy's happy. We can go ahead and push. And there we go. And what was the runtime there? Is that... I don't know how to read that. Is that... That's not 3 minutes anyway. It was definitely... Clippy says it took 2 minutes. I guess I'm inclined to believe Rust when it says that it took a certain amount of time. Feels like a lot longer. Maybe if I had a little timer that even just said, oh, there's going to be 3 minutes taken here in execution, maybe that could be a nice little terminal project. Well, I'm sure a project like that exists. In fact, doesn't PV do that? PV terminal or command line. Monitoring of data being sent through a pipe. Not quite. I guess pipe view. I'm being helped by Kit's tail there. So I think he's saying that it's ready to close out the stream as well. So yeah, there's another one. Glad to have made a little bit more progress on this project after a fair hiatus of a few months. And so yeah, thanks to anyone checking out the stream, and I'll see everyone again. Take care.